Hello there, this is Robin Gamble. Welcome to the Scholar Warrior podcast. Now, the idea of the Scholar Warrior has been around for thousands of years across many great cultures. And the concept is this, that one of the highest achievements in society is to become skilled in the martial arts while also pursuing the scholarly pursuits of painting, poetry, music, philosophy, and more. So it's here that I interview martial artists as well as artists in various fields, so that you, the listener, can gain a peek into their techniques, skills, and strategies for success. And so that you, the listener, may gather these gems and apply them on your own path to self-mastery and excellence. Enjoy. Hello there, valued listener. I'm very excited for you to be listening to this interview with Daniel Reid because it is a complete roller coaster. So many fascinating subjects are covered in this conversation, and Daniel has some really interesting viewpoints on a whole range of topics. Before you jump into it, I just wanted to apologize for a few scratchy moments in terms of the sound quality. I worked really hard to get a load of buzzing off the audio that for some reason came through when we were recording this, and literally 95% of the buzzing is gone. But for some reason, there's still a few scratchy points in this podcast. A couple of points where it echoes, and maybe just 20 seconds where there's a bit of buzzing. Aside from that, the sound is pretty much fine, and I don't think it really impacts the quality of the information that is in this interview too much. But I just wanted to apologize for the few scratchy bits anyway. I hope you enjoy this interview, guys. I absolutely loved it. I found it completely fascinating. So enjoy listening to Daniel Reid, multiple best-selling author. Okay, so today I'm with Daniel Reid. He's a best-selling author and a leading expert on Eastern philosophy and medicine. He's written numerous books and magazine articles on a wide range of Asian self-health and self-healing practices, and has established an international reputation for the practical efficacy of his traditional approach to modern health problems. Daniel was born in 1948 in San Francisco and spent his childhood in East Africa. After completing a BA in Eastern Asian Studies at Berkeley in 1970, and later a Master's in Chinese Language and Civilization at the Monterey Institute of International Studies, he moved to Taiwan. And it's there that he spent 16 years studying and writing about various aspects of traditional Chinese culture, focusing particularly on Chinese medicine and ancient Daoist health and longevity systems. He later lived in Chiang Mai, Thailand, and Byron Bay, Australia, and among his notable titles are the Tao of Health, Sex and Longevity, the Handbook of Chinese Healing Herbs, Complete Guide to Qigong, and the Tao of Detox. All of these are very, very popular books. And I recently got the chance to meet and drink tea with Daniel and found it a real delight to speak with someone who's so intensely knowledgeable and articulate on the topic of ancient Chinese wisdom. It's incredibly rare to meet someone with those credentials and who's also very knowledgeable on a host of other topics to boot. So it's a great pleasure to welcome Daniel Reid to the Scholar Warrior podcast. Welcome, Daniel.
Thank you very much, Robin.
Okay, as I've outlined to you just previously, I'm profoundly aware that within an hour, we're not going to fully realize some of the topics that we're going to talk about. But I feel that if we go broad, the listeners can get a sense of your work, and it could be a springboard to go into topics deeper at a later date. So as you suggested, perhaps there's something they like, they can send me a message and we could dive into that another time. But for this episode, we're going to look at your background and have a look at health and sex and longevity and throw in some bonus questions as well.
Right.
So I've been talking quite a lot now. That's more than I need to talk. I'd like to find out about your background, Daniel, because you've got a fascinating backstory. You were born in San Francisco in the US of A. However, I wonder if you could tell us a bit about how you grew up in East Africa. How did that come about?
Well, It was in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, under the reign of the late Emperor Haile Selassie. And it was in the early 1950s that the emperor wanted to start an airline.
Okay.
So he contracted a team of Americans in the airline business. My father was in Trans World Airlines. And of course, right after World War II, nobody wanted to go to Africa. They all wanted to settle down in America.
Right.
But my father said thought it would be a good idea. He had a war bride, a German wife, and 2 young boys, and so off we went to Ethiopia, where he and 5 other guys from TWA established Ethiopian Airlines for the emperor. We lived there for 10 years.
That's quite dramatic, and that's Haile Selassie that we often have heard Bob Marley singing about and stuff.
Yeah,
right?
his personal name was Rastafari.
Right, okay. Very interesting. Any good memories of those days growing up there?
Oh, yeah, it was a wonderful place to grow up. Of course, we had servants. That was always a plus. And no television. Okay. Definitely a plus. And it was just a great place. We went to a small school. It was a private school with only a few teachers who shifted back and forth between 2 classes at a time. But we got a very good education. I was actually ahead of the crowd when we came back. And that's it. We had a good family life. And my dad would like to go hunting. So we would just hop in the car and drive for an hour, and then off we were in the boondocks, shooting ducks and geese and things like that. So it was a very good way to grow up.
Very cool.
I think the best thing about it was that it accustomed me to living in foreign cultures. It's something that I really took to. So basically, as soon as I got out of school, with my master's degree from Monterey, I took off for Taiwan, something which many people would not do at my age in America. They wanted to stay home where it was familiar. But for me, it was I just couldn't wait to get there.
Right, the seeds were planted pretty early. So
yeah.
You returned to San Francisco, and you were there, as we've chatted a little bit about before, in the peak of the flower power years.
Yeah.
So did you have a flower in your hair, and what did it feel like?
Certainly did. We came back actually when I was in 8th grade to New York, and then to California for 2 years, back and forth. But by the time 1968 rolled around, I had been I'd been my sophomore year at Columbia University in New York, and I got tired of New York, and so I went and transferred to UC Berkeley in 68, and of course, being who I am, I jumped right into the scene there and grew my hair long and did all the other things that we did in those days, but maintained a straight A average throughout school because I liked my studies.
Okay. What drove you to China and ultimately to the path of the fully fledged cinephile?
Well, I'm telling that story in my memoirs. It's rather unconventional, but let's put it like this. I had no idea what I wanted to major in by the time my junior year began, or maybe it was my senior year. I attended a lecture for a course that I had to take for requirement, but the professor who was giving the lecture said, you have to show up for the first lecture. And on that particular day, I was in a very different state of mind, let's put it, and had forgotten all about it, and then realized at the last minute I had to go and attend. So in the enhanced state of mind that I was in, I found my way to the lecture hall, sat in the back row, and for the next 90 minutes listened to this professor, Dr. Franz Schurman. He was quite well known in his field, and he was a political radical. talk about China starting 5,000 years ago and taking it right up to the Communist Revolution. And it just, the more he spoke, the more I realized that I actually was very familiar with all this. I don't know how that was possible, but by the end of the lecture, it was absolutely clear to me that this is what I would do with my life. And so I declared an individual major, which I was allowed to do as an honor student, and took every single course there was in Chinese studies, literature, history, all that stuff. Had some really good professors. And the only thing that I couldn't do there was learn the language, which of course I realized was the key. I had to be able to learn not only to speak Chinese, but to read it.
I see.
So one of my professors said, well, if you want to do that, the best place to go is the Monterey Institute. So I went down there and I submitted an application for the following year because I had decided when I got out of Berkeley that I needed to take a year off. So my brother and I went to southern France, and from there I went to India. I wandered around India for about 8 months and had almost forgotten about Monterey and Chinese and all that. And I received a letter in the mail way up in the Himalaya from my mother saying, you've been accepted. And I said, I looked for what? And then I realized it was for the Chinese intensive course that summer. And of course, at that time, being where I was, I really, the last thing I wanted to do was go back to America and go to school. But it sank back in, and I did go. And I appeared in Monterey the last day, the last hour of registration for the course, with hair down to the middle of my back, wearing Indian clothes and carrying a Shiva drum. And the woman who was in charge said, well, we've been waiting for you. I was wondering if you were going to show up. And I did. And so there I was for 2 years, and I did a master's degree in Chinese. I majored in poetry.
Okay. So Lipo and Zhengzi and all of that good stuff.
Please, because my Chinese name, a good friend of my main professor, my favorite teacher, was also a novelist, a Chinese novelist, and a professor. And he gave me the name Li Dan. So the great Li clan was the one from which I took my surname. And of course, I liked all the great poets like Li Bai and Li Qingzhao and all the other Lis. So the guy whose poetry I specialized in was called Li Hoju. He was a minor poet, at least in the eyes of history, and also the king of an ephemeral kingdom between the Tang and Song dynasties. So I identified very much with him and his poetry, and that's what I did my master's on.
I see. And you, upon completion, were eager to get to China.
Well, I was actually eager to get to China. Again, I had thought I would go to China. I was going to go to Beijing. And I sent out all these letters to various embassies. Of course, it didn't reply because China was in the throes of the Cultural Revolution. Yeah. And the last thing they wanted was an old hippie with a master's degree in Chinese moving to Beijing. So my teacher said, you don't want to go to China. Come to Taiwan. That's where everything you like is still going. So I went sort of for a holiday with him to Taipei, and I stayed for 16 years.
So what were your feelings and your observations upon arrival in Taipei?
I felt at home.
Wow.
Very much at home. And of course it was the language that did it. Just from the moment I stepped in a taxi at the airport to go to a guest house, my father got me a job at the Hilton Hotel there. It just opened. The Hilton belonged to TWA, so he got me in there, and I started out there at the hotel, where I met all kinds of people. And the language was the key, of course. So, like I said, I felt very much at home there. I wasn't lost or anything. I found a very nice house up on a hillside outside of town. And I stayed in that house the entire 16 years. I had a good relationship with the landlord. And so one thing led to another. I stayed in the hospitality industry for about 2.5 years, and I didn't want to do that anymore. So I just quit, stayed home. And one day, two rather dissolute editors from Hong Kong banged on my door and said, "Are you Daniel Reid?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "Well, we're doing a book on nightlife in Asia. And we've been told that you're the best person to speak with in Taiwan." There weren't any other writers in those days. Right. So I was flat broke, and they said they'd pay me $500 to write a chapter on nightlife in Taipei. And I was honest with him. I told him that I'm not a writer. And the guy interrupted me. He said, "Did you go to college?" I said, "Yes." "Have you ever written any term papers?" I said, "Yes." "Do it like that. You can write." So I did. And 2 weeks later, they came back, and I showed them what I'd done. They liked it, and they gave me $500, which I thought was a very, very nice way to make a living. Stay at home. You don't have to get dressed up. Or leave the house. So when they went back to Hong Kong, they went to their haunt there at the Foreign Correspondence Club and basically told other editors there in the travel business that there was now a writer available in Taiwan. And I started getting all kinds of letters asking for articles on this, that, and the other. So that's how I got my start.
Wow, that's quite a story.
Yeah.
So somehow you got involved in the study of Taoism, longevity, sexual health, herbology, diet. How did that come about?
Well, I can tell you, I was a writer writing travel articles about restaurants and hotels and temples and things. But I had a lot of Chinese friends. And it was an injury that did it. I was playing racquetball at the military club there. I'd wangle the pass to get in, and we used to go every week to play. And I really ruined my back at one afternoon to the point where I was bent over at 90 degrees to the ground. And having had a similar injury before, I knew I was going to be that way for probably a month. And a friend of mine there said, "No, you don't worry about it. You got to go see Dr. Huang. He does this special thing on the back. It's a treatment called Tui Na, done with a thumb on the nerves and damaged tissues. And he has an herbal poultice that he'll slap on your back. You'll be fine in a day or two," which, of course, I thought was nonsense. But being doubled up in pain, I went with him. The doctor laid me out on his table, and he worked on my spine with a special menthol balm that he made himself. And then he mixed up this powder into a paste and put it on a piece of cellophane, taped it to my back, and told me the same thing the guy told me, my friend. He said, "You'll be fine tomorrow," which I took with several grains of salt. Went home, still feeling really uncomfortable, went to bed. And when I woke up in the morning, this is actually true, I got out of bed, went to the bathroom and all that, and had completely forgotten that I had an injury.
Oh, wow.
It wasn't until I was sitting there having breakfast that I remembered all this and felt back there, and the poultice was still there. I peeled it off, and I was fine. And that just really impressed me. Yeah. So a few days later, I went back to the clinic, and I liked this guy, and he liked me. And I said, "Look, I would like to learn more about what you're doing. Could I come 2 or 3 times a week and sort of be your apprentice and help you out?" Which I did for about 6 to 8 months. And during that time, he taught me the basics of Chinese medicine. Of course, I started writing about it. And a year later, I got an assignment to do a book on Chinese herbal medicine, just like that. and I was able to do it, and that led to the next one, and so I started writing about traditional Chinese medicine, which branched out into other things like Qigong. The same guy who led me to Dr. Huang, an American guy, a friend of mine who lived there a long time, also steered me to a really good Qigong teacher. So I learned Qigong. I helped the BBC director do a special program on this guy. I think it's called The Way of the Warrior.
I've seen it.
Yeah, it's still up there on YouTube. Well, I'm in that actually, and it moves on me, which is rather painful. And I interpreted, did the translation for them, and so that branched out into Qigong, and then from there, of course, the cooking came in. It's all related. Mm-hmm. Everything in Chinese culture comes back to the Tao, to the yin and yang, and then the 5 elements, and there's the 5 energies in medicine, and the 5 flavors in food, and then the 5 emotions and colors. It appears in painting, in sculpture, in the language itself. So, having had a foundation in the basic philosophy, which is the Tao, all the other branches of Chinese culture were open to me. It just took a bit of attention and practice within each department.
Now you're saying the doctor was called Dr. Huang.
Dr. Huang, yes.
Is it his full name? Was it what was it?
Huang Guowen.
Okay. I was just trying to think of the people that were in that documentary. Was there a guy called Huang Yixiang as well?
Huang Yixiang. Dr. Huang wasn't in that documentary. This was on martial arts, and Huang Yixiang was the master. He was the one who I learned Chinese from. Qigong, and he was an incredible guy.
He was a big guy, right?
Huge. He was just massive, and his father had been he sold incense and candles. He had a temple shop, sort of, and he was quite wealthy. When the Chinese nationalist exodus came to Taiwan, they were all flat broke, but there were a lot of very accomplished masters among them who hitched a ride on the ship, and he hired some very, very accomplished martial arts masters to train his sons. And Huang Yixiang was the one, what they called the sleeping dragon. He had 19 teachers who taught him traditional martial arts from the northern Chinese lineages. And he used to be quite pugnacious. He'd go out to the parks and challenge others. He was undefeated, and often was invited to tournaments in Japan. You know how they are. They think karate and jiu-jitsu and all that are the best things. He never lost a tournament.
Right. Yeah, he was a formidable guy.
He was, and he was quite a man. He was a Chinese doctor, and he was a calligrapher and a painter, and a great cook, and overall a real gentleman.
So you met some real characters over there. Is there any other people that stick in your mind that were kind of important for you in that time?
Well, I met some very good people through the Qigong class who became very good friends, some of the top students who were also Chinese doctors. So I hung out with them a lot. And, of course, my teacher, Patrick Yang, he was my Chinese teacher. He taught me poetry in Monterey and everything. I managed to lure him back to Taiwan. He had introduced me and brought me there and then gone back to teach. But finally, a couple of years later, he also moved back to Taiwan, and he became one of my best friends.
I think I read an article. Did he pass away recently? Because I read an article, a sort of tribute kind of article that you wrote. Is this the same gentleman?
That's correct. He died in 2008. And I wrote that tribute to him on my website.
He sounded like a very charismatic individual.
was a fantastic teacher. No one ever forgot him after they took his course.
So, as we transition into talking about health and sex and longevity, I think a good prerequisite to this conversation, for the sake of listeners, would be a short description of the Daoists. What's the history? What do they do? What do they believe? What is the Tao? Just most people should be familiar with Taoism if they're listening, but perhaps.
Yeah, the Tao, of course, is the heart of China, the Chinese civilization. The Tao just means the way. It can also mean the path. And it's the Chinese view of how things are, based on long, careful observation of nature. The advantage of Chinese civilization is it's the only one that's still going after 5,000 years. All the others have passed into extinction. But this has been one people living in one place with one tradition. And one of the keys, of course, is the written language. Being ideographic, it didn't change through the centuries as the spoken language changed. So things that were written 3,000 years ago in China can still be read today by anyone who learns the written language. And that made it possible for wisdom and insights to be recorded and kept through all the dynastic changes and the turmoil of revolutions and things. It remained. And the Tao, basically being the way, is just their observation of how things are. And of course, starting with yin and yang, polarity, positive and negative, night and day, male and female, and then branching out into the 5 elements from which things are formed, the 5 basic elements, earth, water, fire, those sorts of things, and then on from there as it developed. And what they did was they started to see the parallels in everything, in the human body, which was a microcosm of the solar system and of the galaxy and of the whole universe. And in human relations, in medicine, all the principles, in cooking, in the art of tea, you'll see that all of the basic principles that drive these different arts boil down to the same basic principles of the Tao. And these are just things that Chinese observed and preserved over the centuries, and then, of course, elaborated on. And things that didn't work or that weren't true just fell by the wayside. And only the real thing, the true principles which did apply, survived. And the thing about the Chinese is that they stuck to it because of learning, because the scholars were always less than 1% of the population who could even read. They had access to what their forefathers were saying and writing thousands of years before. And so they just kept building on the same tradition, which is why Chinese culture works. That is why it works. That's why the country, the civilization has lasted for 5,000 years, because a very small core of educated people with an interest in this sort of thing kept it going. And of course, the society supported them. Today, there's no room for people like that, at least not in China. And most of it is being done by eccentric people like me in other countries. In China, you can't support yourself doing this. The scholars in the old days, of course, were the ones who had the positions in government, but if not, they had patrons, wealthy patrons, who paid their way in exchange for having them as advisors. So, but it's been preserved, and it's still being preserved. I mean, my work is an example of it, but I'm certainly not the only one. I have a good friend in America who goes by the pen name Red Pine, Bill Porter. I met him in Taiwan, and he's now probably the premium translator of classical Chinese and Taoist texts. He's written a dozen or two books, which is very interesting because Red Pine Books about, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago, publisher in China said, I want to translate your books into Chinese. And he said, yeah, but I just translated them from Chinese. But he was translating the classical texts. So they took his work and are taking it still. He's in China right now promoting his work, and translated into Baihua, vernacular. And suddenly, the Chinese people on the mainland started reading this stuff and realized this was their own treasure lode of their own culture, which they'd never paid any attention to. They thought it was all just museum stuff. And they started taking interest in it. And his books are selling much better in China now than they are in all the other Western editions put together.
So, we could get segued, but just to quickly round this off, do you think there will be a renaissance in classical Chinese culture in China?
Well, I've said that all along. It certainly is their only hope. But I guess it's discouraging sometimes. The big problem that happened there in China, and it's never happened before, well, it did happen under the first emperor, the one who burned all the books and buried the scholars alive. That happened in the Communist Revolution. But what happened later was the Cultural Revolution. That really did damage, because for 10 years, there was no education on any level. No one went to school. Families were just completely torn apart. Children were turning their parents in. They were, I don't like to say this, but there were places in southern China where they were actually killing and eating their teachers. It got really barbaric. And having done that, that generation really lost something. You see signs of renaissance here and there, but you also see the overwhelming trend in China to be rude and indifferent to culture and to only think of making money and all these other things. So I don't know. I certainly hope there'll be a renaissance. And in a country like that, with that many people and such an ancient tradition already, and the sort of animosity towards the West, what else are they going to do? They're going to have to rediscover themselves, and if they do, then China will be unstoppable. It'll be, not only will they be an economic juggernaut and a powerful country economically and militarily, but they will be centered within their culture again, which is still, I think, the most highly developed and feasible way for humans to live. If they can rediscover that, that'll be Shangri-La.
Okay. So, just to come back onto the Daoists, they were observers of nature, and they literally studied every aspect of life and how to do it well.
Yeah, the thing is, there's many spiritual traditions where they basically look down on human life, on sex, on food. You're supposed to be celibate, you're not supposed to eat meat, and all these things. Whereas the Taoists look at life as it is now, here on earth, in our bodies, because that's where we are. And Confucius put it very well. He said, pay respect to all gods and demons, but steer clear from them. And he also said, we really don't know how to live properly in this world. Why are we worrying about the next world? We'll be there anyway. So the thing about the Taoists is that they were trying to make things work on earth and not worry about what happens when you get to heaven or the other place, because that was going to happen anyway. And if they figured that if you were to find how to live properly in the world, in your body, which meant food, medicine, which meant dealing with sex, which meant how to organize society and government and all that. If you were to do things right here, you would be in the right place when you died to go to where you should go then. But the idea of joining a church and giving your faith to it in exchange for a promise that you're going to be saved, that didn't seem like a good deal to the Daoists. It didn't seem really like a good deal. So they didn't over-concern themselves with that aspect. I mean, they're definitely into spiritual work, but more in the sense of fine-tuning consciousness and awareness so that it could be applied to proper organization of life in the world.
Let's get on to how they thought about health. So what do you feel are the fundamental differences between ancient Taoist ideas of health and those that are typically held in modern Western culture?
Well, the first and foremost thing is that your health is your own responsibility. If you're going to be healthy, if you live healthy, it's because you did the right thing. If you're sick, you messed it up. And it's your responsibility, which is true. It's not the responsibility of a medical system or the doctors. So you were supposed to learn about how your body eat properly, and there were people who could teach you that. The Daoists could. I'd say the most telling difference in healthcare in traditional China was this. A family would retain the services of a doctor who they had faith in and who they could afford, and based on his record of keeping people healthy. And that doctor would become what we call the family doctor. Now this thing, the way he got paid was he would come around to the family, to the house, once a month or however many times he thought, and check on everybody's health, take their pulses, look at their tongues, look at their eyes, see if they're getting too fat, too weak, they got bad posture, and he would straighten them out. And as long as he kept everybody healthy in the family, he got paid. He got a retainer, either a monthly or a yearly retainer. The moment anybody in a family got sick, the payment stopped. And at his own expense, he had to get that person back into health. Or he would not get paid again, and maybe even fired, and they would get another doctor. Unlike today, where you go to a doctor when you're sick already and pay the doctor a huge fee, basically, to manage your disease. Because the doctors today have no idea what the real cause of anything is. They've lost, everyone is specialized in different symptoms. This guy deals with your head, this guy deals with your stomach, another guy deals with your bones. And all they do is look for the symptoms that they're familiar with and give you drugs to suppress the symptoms so you're more comfortable. And when that stops working, they send you to the surgeon. And for that, they charge you a lot of money. There's no actual healing or curing done. And so people are getting sicker and sicker and sicker because they keep getting more and more diseases, which are managed to a certain extent by this expert. Then the disease manifests somewhere else, and they go to a skin specialist, and then they go to another specialist until finally they're in the surgeon's table. And that doesn't work. And in the traditional Taoist system, in the traditional Chinese medical system, the idea was you would have a family doctor who would give guidance in matters of health, in regular visits, and he would go into your kitchen and see how you're eating, and then he would make changes in everyone's diet. They would give tonics. Tonics are very different from herbs that are meant to suppress symptoms. Tonics are meant to build up your vital organs when they're weak and to balance your neurochemistry, your metabolism, and to keep you healthy. And you would learn this from your doctor and then take care of yourself. So it's responsibility, self-health care.
And the doctors were paid to prevent illness, not treat it.
Correct. And when the prevention regimen didn't work, they were held responsible
for
failing to do it right, and then they weren't paid anymore. until they had to take the next step into curative medicine. And, a doctor did well based on his clinical experience, what they call Lin Chuang, bedside experience. It wasn't based on your diploma from a medical school and what hospital you did your residency in, because you can't learn enough that way. The real thing you had to do was have extensive experience. So it took a lot of dedication to be a good doctor in China, but there were rewards for it.
Yeah, a very, 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 very different concept. And obviously, if that was the way you're operating as a doctor, it's going to be in your interest to be continually refining and improving your methods of prevention. I mean, that's just going to be your modus operandi.
Absolutely.
It's very, very different. So there's a big issue with mental health in the West at the moment. Many people say there appears to be an epidemic in the West of mental health issues like depression, anxiety, bipolar, eating disorders. What are your views on the causes and best treatments for such problems coming from the traditional Chinese or Taoist viewpoint?
I would say all of those symptoms you mentioned are, if you take it overall in terms of individual as well as just the number of people who have these problems, it's 80% physiological and only about 20% psychological. And they go the other way. They want you to tell them about your childhood and who bullied you in school and these things. That's really not, because those things happen to everybody. Everybody has trouble in childhood, especially in the Western world, and gets bullied and all that. But most people are okay. So that can't be the cause. The cause of it is, let's just face it, those symptoms are all related to neurochemistry. It's your brain. It's your brain that's not malfunctioning. There are disorders of the nervous system. There could be many causes for that. Today, I could list a dozen of them. I mean, diet is obvious, too much sugar. Sugar is a drug, by the way. Sucrose doesn't exist in nature. It has no nutritional value, zero. And it has anti-nutritional value. Most telling is that sucrose, that molecule, is processed in the rewards system of the brain where heroin and cocaine are metabolized. So it's a drug. I mean, we got to just call a spade a spade. And sugar is the most highly abused drug on the planet, and it's addictive. It's every bit as addictive as heroin, and it has all kinds of damaging effects on brain function, imbalancing. So there's one example. Another thing that's causing, you mentioned that it's become an epidemic, and people have been taking sugar and all that too much for hundreds of years. So what else is doing it? The stress and all that. But the main thing is the electromagnetic pollution today in the world. We live in a sea, in an ocean of microwaves, high frequency vibrations from telecommunications, from iPhones, computers, that have an extremely imbalancing effect on neurochemistry and neuroenergetics, as it were. Your brain is basically a computer, and it has you can measure it with a voltmeter. The brain is like an electrical instrument, and it's very delicately balanced. And we are constantly being assaulted by damaging electromagnetic fields, which set things off. Now, there could be different things. A person who actually does get a serious mental disease might be living with a phone tower for cell phones on the roof of the building he's in. Mm-hmm. If you're anywhere within 500 meters of one of those things, you're going to have problems. You're going to have bad memory. You're going to be in a bad mood. You're going to be fighting with your wife all day. Something is going to be amiss. But this, people spend hours watching, 6 hours a day, I think in America now, or 7, watching TV, and there's radiation coming off the screens. People have their beds up against a wall, and on the other side there's a refrigerator or a television, or there's a computer in the room left on sleep mode. All these things are putting your brain function off balance. And that causes symptoms. And the symptoms are everything you just mentioned: anxiety, depression, insomnia, bad temper, all these things like that. So you have to take countermeasures against that. You're not going to be able to change that situation. There are ways of dealing with it. And some of the ways are just strengthening other aspects, like taking certain tonics, taking certain things for your brain. You know why so many people smoke today? Everybody says we got to stop people smoking. Why? Tobacco is a very powerful corrective for disorders of the brain and nervous system. Now, the problem with smoking today is that the chemicals in the cigarette, there's 200 to 300 very bad chemicals in commercial cigarettes, including proven carcinogens. Now, what are they doing? You want to fix that situation? Very simple. Pass strict legislation to ban the sale and manufacture of any tobacco that has any chemicals in it. But there's no such thing. Because it's a big industry. And they just won't, you're not going to go organic any more than the food industry is. So, but the reason, I'd go back to what you're saying, the reason people smoke so much, and you'll see it in the countries with the most stress: Japan, China. Everybody smokes. And because they're trying to get the effect of the tobacco. They get the damage from the chemicals. It's not particularly pleasant to smoke tobacco. It doesn't taste particularly good. You don't get high from it. So what's the point? It's not fun. People like to have fun. However, what they do like, I don't think very many people who smoke every day are aware of why they're smoking. It's to correct imbalances in their neurochemistry without going and taking pharmaceutical drugs. That's basically one example. So there's other substances. There's marijuana. There's the CBD oil, which is non-psychoactive but very good for brain chemistry, and which the pharmaceutical company is trying to get suppressed all over the world. They're not even worried about marijuana. They're worried about CBD oil because it works.
So people are taking these substances to balance them from the effect of modern life, effectively.
That's correct, and that also explains the so-called epidemic of opiate use in America especially, but also in Europe, is that pharmaceutical companies are now producing opiates, but ones they can patent because they're chemically tweaked. And these things are 100 times more addictive and dangerous than opium. But you can't get opium. So why? Because it can't be patented. But that works very well too. Opiates are, in fact, the most effective way to balance imbalanced neurochemistry that can't be fixed any other way. It won't respond to diet. It won't respond to breathing exercises. It won't respond to medicines. Finally, the bottom line is tobacco or something like opium. But you can't get that. You can't get pure tobacco, and the only opiates you can get are these things like OxyContin today, and people are dropping dead like flies from it.
Yeah, there's a huge problem with opiate-based painkillers and all these kind of things that get abused.
Before that, most people would never even dream of using opiates or opium or heroin or anything. Most people in societies wouldn't go near it. Now, with these new ones coming out from the pharma cartels, the doctors are prescribing them like candy for pain. Anything, back pain, surgical pain, and they give it to them. You get a 1-month prescription, 2 months, you take it for your pain. Pain goes away, you can't get any more. And suddenly you plunge into depression because you were one of those people who's also taking antidepressants, and you've discovered now the antidepressants don't work. It was the opiate that worked. So they go to the street to get it.
And all of this is a knock-on effect of modern civilization.
That's correct. That is correct. It's modern. And China, too, during the Manchu dynasty, as it started to decay and the Western intrusions, the Opium Wars, and the colonial powers in Shanghai and Hong Kong, it got more and more difficult to make a living. It got more and more stressful to live there. And right in tune with that, opium use went up. Although it really didn't do much damage physically. They were, of course, it's addictive, but so is sugar. The explanation for that is that they were living in a stressful time when it was very hard to make your way in society under a foreign dynasty with foreign intrusion. And so they resorted to that sort of thing because it worked. That's all. It's a form of self-medication. And, I don't think people should be thrown in jail for that. The medication should be made available by the health system, but they don't. They don't allow it.
Another very big problem in the developed countries like US, UK, Australia is obesity. And I was reading a past interview that you gave, and you said with regards to obesity, and I'm going to quote you, they're starving, the fat people are starving, end quote.
Correct.
Could you elaborate on that for listeners?
Yeah, because they're eating junk. They're eating food that has no nutritional value. I mean, your brain is an incredible organ. It's so finely tuned. So let's say you eat a meal, and it's a meal of organic foods. It's well balanced. It's protein. There's essential fatty acids. There's vitamins, minerals. You'll eat a moderate amount of food, and then you won't want any more. You won't feel like eating anymore, and that's because the hunger signal has been switched off in the brain, the one that controls your appetite. And when you get what you need, the sufficient level of nutrients required to last you for a couple of days, the hunger signal will just get turned off. You won't want to eat anymore, no matter what's on the table. But if you eat the kind of diet people eat today, of junk food, processed food, sugar, refined white flour, phony foods, those are all very fattening too. They cause your body to retain fat. But you'll just keep eating. You'll see a person go through 6 hamburgers, 4 chickens, or whatever, because the chickens today are not nutritionally valuable due to the way they raise them. Because their brains are still saying you don't have enough potassium, you don't have enough magnesium, you don't have any fatty acids. Keep eating until you get it. And of course they keep eating the same crap, and they put on more and more weight. And that is the basic cause of obesity, is that fat people, obese people are not getting fed nutritionally rich foods. And the junk they are eating is the most fattening stuff of all. The single most fattening thing on the table is not even a food. It's a drug, and that's called sugar.
Right.
Sugar is stored in the body as fat because the body has to do something with it, or it would kill it. You'd get poisoned. And so it sticks it away as fat. Fat doesn't have any blood circulation in it. It stays away from circulation and doesn't go and poison the rest of your body.
And as you were saying earlier, if you're getting sick or you're losing health, you've not maintained your health, and so people are going to have to educate themselves on diet as well. It's their responsibility. Yeah, well,
what you're going to do, you're going to have somebody standing there every time you eat something and tell you, no, don't eat that, eat that. You can't afford a food advisor to be with you at every meal. You have to learn about this stuff. And it's just ignorance, the old saying about when you break the law, they haul you into court. Ignorance is no excuse. It's irresponsible to know what the law is about taxes and theft and robbery, so you stay out of jail. It's also irresponsible to know the laws of health, because this is your body. It's people don't have a user's manual. They have a user's manual for their iPhones, for their cars. They go through it. They learn every single function. They take incredible care of a Porsche or a Harley Davidson motorcycle. They just run like clockwork, but they don't follow a user's manual for their bodies in which they live. So that's what happens.
I see.
Look, you mentioned my books. I write all kinds of books. I'm a writer, so like a cook cooks all kinds of food. But the main thing I write about, these health books, basically, they are users' manuals. They are the reader's user's manual for the care of his body, his energy, and his mind. Because those are the three levels on which we exist. In Tibetan Buddhism, they're called the three gates of energy. In Taoism, they're called the three treasures of life. You've got those three things. You've got a physical body through which you can act in the world. You've got breath, and through breath you can talk and breathe properly. And you've got a mind, which allows you to think. And all of those three gates or three treasures simply process your energy. That's how you manifest your energy in the world. And it's a really good idea to learn how they work and then to properly utilize them.
Sanbao, the three treasures.
Sanbao, exactly, the three treasures.
Yes, we don't appear to have that in the West. They say stuff like body, mind, soul, body, mind, spirit, but
it's a talk. They don't. That's just slogans.
Yeah, absolutely. And we seem to be separating them more and more and more, and reducing them down into smaller and smaller components.
Right, specialization. But in fact, yeah, you got a problem, an emotional problem. You can't get along with your wife. You have a certain fetish. Go to a psychiatrist, lie on the couch, and talk. You got a problem with your body. Well, where is the symptoms manifesting? Of course, that's not where the cause is. You got a headache, you go to the headache doctor. You got a bowel problem, go to the bowel doctor. You got bad skin, go to the skin doctor. But there aren't any doctors out there who can trace the symptoms to the root cause and fix that.
Just the last point on health before we have a look at sex and longevity. In regards to, of course I understand this is a massive topic, but in regards to cancer, I read some interesting things in a previous interview. What are the negative influences that have developed, do you think, in the past century that has led to the dramatic increase of cancer nowadays?
Tissue toxicity.
Tissue toxicity.
It's the terminal stage of tissue toxicity in a particular part of the body where the toxins have accumulated, to the point that circulation of blood and energy is blocked out and it starts to rot. Or to put it another way, it starts to ferment. A tumor is fermenting tissue. It's fermenting cells. They become anaerobic. Oxygen can't get in. Acid waste is not removed. It's like a pile of garbage that starts to ferment, and that's cancer. Now, these therapies are out there. I mean, there's ozone therapy, there's intravenous ozone, there's hyperbolic chambers where you can lie down in them and they kind of force oxygen right through your skin. There's many ways to do this stuff. Alkalization, there's all sorts of methods for doing that. One of the best ways is fasting. So the methods are out there, but they're not being used because there's no money in it for the medical industry. The cancer treatment is a multi-billion-dollar industry, and so they use techniques that are very costly, and they don't work. So there you go.
One of the, again, this is the last quote before we move on, but I read you say, chemotherapy, please. There's nothing more poisonous or acid-forming than chemotherapy, which is exactly contributing to the main cause of cancer.
Look, the therapist, the nurse who gives chemotherapy, dresses up in hazardous waste attire. Okay, hazardous waste attire. They're wearing gloves. If they if the hypodermic needle or tube leaks under the floor, it eats through the linoleum. What are they doing injecting this into the bloodstream? Now, the theory is it kills fast-growing cells. Well, it certainly does very well, including your hair, your nails, and your liver. Liver cells grow very fast. So it destroys your liver, it destroys your red blood cells, your hair falls out, and it temporarily stops the growth of tumors. But you can't have chemotherapy every day of your life till you die, because you'll die very fast. So the moment they stop it, what happens? The cancer comes back with a vengeance. Those cells that survive that onslaught of chemicals will regenerate, and it'll be even more difficult to get rid of.
Another very important topic for the Taoists, and for anyone really, and that is sex. What are the salient differences between how ancient Chinese Taoists thought about sex and how modern Westerners typically view sex?
Well, first of all, there was no things attached to it from religion, okay? The moral factor wasn't in there, not to say that they were immoral. The idea was that sex being one of the two most powerful drives in the human body, the other being food, it was considered important to learn how to manage it. Basically, to get down to the nitty-gritty, people didn't restrain themselves from having sex. Confucius had a lot of sex, from what I hear. And I don't know any Daoists myself who don't have very, how to put it, colorful sexual relations. But in terms of the actual act, the idea is that for the male, you got to slow down. The rush to orgasm, or maybe I shouldn't use that word, it's ejaculation, is a big problem. It doesn't matter when you're 18, but when you get over 30 and then 40 and then 50, it starts to become a problem if you're losing too much semen, because that is considered a very precious resource in Chinese medicine. What happens is when a man getting older, and you see it here in Thailand a lot. I mean, men come here alone, or when they're old, to retire, to go to these sex parlors and get it off, day in and day out. And they're losing a lot of semen. And the body is programmed, the male body, to replace semen immediately. Immediately. So what do? You're getting older, maybe you don't eat so well either, you're drinking too much. The body starts to borrow nutrients, essential items from other areas to make semen. And one of those is cerebrospinal fluid. Zinc, for example, is needed to produce semen. So, excuse me, you said nothing is banned. The old term, fucking your brains out, that's based on reality. Because, and when I've taught people who are in their 50s about this in Taiwan, some older guys who are out fucking every night, and they were having problems. They couldn't stand up straight. They couldn't remember where they put the keys. They were starting to get fatigued all the time. And I said, look, practice the old Taoist way. And when you first tell a man, have plenty of sex but don't ejaculate every time, they think you're insane. So what's the whole point? And I said, well, there's plenty of point. Try it. For one thing, men start to appreciate their partners more and their partner's responses. It's quite exciting when a woman gets really turned on. And everybody notices that if you have a long night of active sex with a healthy partner and don't ejaculate, when you wake up in the morning, you feel great. And there's none of that post-coital blues that you hear about, and you lose interest in your partner and you roll over and go to sleep. It's not like that. And there's a very real difference in your vitality. So for men, that was the main principle. And it became more important the older a man got. You can completely ruin your health that way. And on the other hand, you can preserve your vitality, because every time you do have sex and sexual stimulation, all your hormones and your endocrine glands are all stimulated. Hormones are essential for longevity. You actually build up your power. It's much better than abstaining. So that works, and I can vouch for it. Also, it's a very convenient method of birth control. If you learn how a woman's cycle works, there's only a short period when they can actually get pregnant. So during the rest, that's when you can let it out, and during the rest of the time, you have as much sex as you want, but you don't ejaculate, and you don't need condoms and creams and spermicides and all that nonsense, which makes sex ridiculous. So for a woman, it was very different. For a woman, it was regarded important that she does reach orgasm. For one thing, a woman doesn't eject her vital fluids in orgasm. She gets wet, but that's lubricant. She doesn't lose anything. On the contrary, a healthy woman through orgasm, and with a little bit of training or just reading a few books, can learn how to channel that energy upwards into her organs, into her brain, into her spinal cord, and become very, very strong, very powerful. And it can be used, that energy can be used for other functions, improving mental clarity, spiritual work, whatever. So those two work together, because if a man is having sex and controlling himself through the techniques, which I describe very carefully in my book, it has to do with breathing and controlling certain muscles, prolonging the act and actually enjoying it even more because he's getting this incredible response from his partner, the woman also has enough time to relax into it and to arrive at the point of orgasm, and then she feels good too. When it's all over, you haven't missed anything as a man. It's only a few seconds, which admittedly everyone enjoys, but doesn't have to be there every single time. And the woman also has her satisfaction. People get along well, they're happy. If you're sexually balanced in a relationship, usually the rest of it will do pretty well.
So, big differences between Taoist and ancient Chinese thought on sex and modern sex, modern Western sex, which seems to be about pounding away and getting your rocks off. Yeah.
And also being indifferent.
Yeah.
Women's response. I mean, women end up going to other women for satisfaction.
What is the deal with the guilt connected with sex in the West?
Oh, this is the whole Judeo-Christian Islamic trip. It's the monotheistic, the angry God. It was a control mechanism. People who are sexually balanced and fulfilled and all that aren't going to be very good candidates for the sort of religious rigor that they promote. You know, those three religions, and pardon me, anyone listening to this who gets offended by it, but it happens to be historically true. They're all one religion. They all go back to Abraham. And then they branched out. There was Judaism first, and then Christianity came along, and then Islam. But the gods, all three are just, they have a different name, but they have the same character. They're angry, jealous, violent. They tell you you should go out and slaughter everyone who's not part of your club. There is a very strict moralistic thing attached to sex. Now, where does that come in? Are you supposed to be guilty about eating food too? Sex is a natural instinct which is essential to the propagation of the species. You're not going to get rid of it. Learn to manage it. So all this stuff about guilt is a control mechanism which established religions like that use to control people. So when can you have sex? When you've gotten married in your church and it's been sanctioned, and then you're dependent on that for validation, et cetera, et cetera. So you don't have this in Asia. There's no guilt attached to sex in any Asian spiritual tradition or even the organized religions, Hinduism, Buddhism. This is not there.
That is a very good point. Okay, last little thing on sex before we have a look at longevity. I've read in your books that celibacy can be just as... was this in a book? I'm not sure, but I've read somewhere that you've said celibacy can be just as reckless an indulgence if you haven't mastered the transmutation of sexual energy.
That's bad for you.
Yeah, so how does this also explain the sexual deviance of many disciplines which practice celibacy?
Absolutely. Celibacy, first of all, it's not even a moral issue. It shouldn't be. Traditionally, it was used by Daoists and Buddhists, Tibetans, in certain schools of practice, whereby you needed that vitality because you transformed it. You transformed it into a different form of energy, so to support your spiritual work. Some of the more advanced practices require an enormous amount of very, very focused energy. And the place to get it is your sexual energy, because that's the most powerful. You're not going to get it from food. Breathing exercises, those are all good, but the real power is in the sex, obviously, because that's how nature keeps the species going, by making you have a lot of sex. So celibacy in that case was very useful. But when you have a clergy that's living in the world and being exposed to beautiful women all the time and seeing other people dressed in sexy ways and watching TV and seeing all the advertisements with beautiful women displaying their stuff, what do you think it's going to do? They get horny and they get bottled up because they're producing that excitement, lower excitement in the lower chakras, which they're not transforming. It's just producing loads of semen and hormones. And, well, it comes out in a deviant way. You have the sexual abuse of the choir boys, and you have all kinds of other things happening, which are just deviations, which would not exist if they weren't by having to take these vows of celibacy, which they don't keep.
It's a very curious... Yeah, it's a very curious problem, because it's so obvious and been around for so long, but they've not found a way around that.
No, they haven't. I mean, even in Buddhism, it's not quite as moralistic, but I mean, monks are supposed to be celibate. It goes back to the time of the Buddha, when he noticed that he had some very good followers. He had some very good disciples, and then they'd go out and they'd get a girl pregnant. They'd go out with their begging bowls, and a beautiful young woman would answer the door, and the next thing they were in the house and getting undressed and having sex, and the girl got pregnant, they had to get married, and they couldn't be a Buddhist monk anymore. Right. So it was a practical thing, because to control that aspect. If you became a monk, you were supposed to be celibate. They were also, many Buddhist orders don't want you to eat garlic and chilies and things. Why? They stimulate the lower chakras. They excite sex. So it's a practical thing if you choose that path. Otherwise, don't go there. Just live in the world. But there wasn't really a moralistic attachment to it. It wasn't this thing about that sex was a sin. It was just a practical thing. If you're in a monastic order and you want to really do those practices properly, you needed to not only maintain that sort of sexual vitality and use it for other purposes, you had to avoid complications which arise from sex, like pregnancy and getting married and having families to take care of. There was this practical matter. In that case, you can't be a monk.
On the topic of sexual cultivation, controlling your ejaculations as a man can greatly improve longevity. That's correct.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It becomes, for people as men get older, it becomes a supplemental source of vitality.
Okay. So let's jump into a little bit of longevity. I have read that Taoists measure their lives in breaths, heartbeats, and ejaculations.
That's correct, pretty much. It's the rate at which you age. It's not a matter of how many birthdays you've had, how many days have gone by, but how fast you burn up your energy. You've got a limited, it's like a battery. It's got a limited life. It's got an expiry date. So if you use the battery slowly and you don't keep all the lights burning all the time and all the appliances and everything, but sort of cut down, the battery will last longer. That's called yuan qi in Chinese. That's called primordial energy.
And is that the same as your prenatal jing?
It's related to your prenatal jing, yes. I mean, in the prenatal system, what's body, breath, and mind are all one thing, aren't they? You don't have those separations. So prenatal state of emptiness in your mind, don't have a body. Your jing, your prenatal jing, I think is a lot related to DNA, actually. That's something you bring from somewhere else. You don't have it. It comes from your parents, and it's a vitality, a gene that you inherit from outside. Your energy is the same thing. You have yuan qi. They say the Tao, you come into this world with a certain level, your battery's charged up to a certain level, and your lifespan is determined about how fast you use that up.
Why do the Daoists and the Chinese value longevity so much? Why does it mean so much to them?
Well, it's certainly not just to hang around and watch the next Mission Impossible show. It's, as you get older, you start to think about what happens next. When you're a teenager and in your 20s and in the prime of life, you don't think much about what happens after death. But as you get older, you do. And, of course, the Western way is you just go to church all the time, you follow the rules, you give your faith, and somehow you're going to be saved. Someone's going to come and rescue you at that time. Well, the Taoists don't believe that's the case. Neither do Buddhists. It's what your realization is. Where your consciousness is at the time. So the reason that it's also true in India, when you turn 60, traditionally you're supposed to go out into the forest. Your family is taken care of, the kids are grown up, you've left some money for your wife, and off you go into the forest, and you meet some sages, and you start meditating and preparing for the next stage. Taoists did the same thing. They went up the mountain. And so longevity was valued because at that point, when people start worrying or concerned about longevity is when they are older anyway, and they are starting to think about the next stage. And so it's valued because an additional 10 years or 20 years gives you a chance to practice, or to get to a certain stage of realization where you will be prepared for the next stage after death, because they all know full well that consciousness goes on, that awareness itself is indestructible, and they have this idea that it's quite important, the quality of your consciousness at the time determines where you go. It's your qualification. So that's why longevity became important. Now, it's very different from in the West today. People get older and older, and they say, "Oh, I got to start taking Viagra so I can have more sex, and I got to have a good retirement fund so I can play golf." And the only reason they want to live longer is so they can play, and that's not the traditional view in the Taoist tradition, or the Buddhist, or the Hindu, for that matter. The idea of longevity was to give you time to prepare to cultivate yourself spiritually.
There's a big difference.
Well, there's a very big difference, yes.
It's almost, time to play or time to work on yourself is a stark contrast.
Well, this is another problem. In the Western world today, people don't play when they're young. They jump from college straight into a job at Goldman Sachs or whatever, and working their butts off. They don't take time out to really enjoy life. And then finally they retire and they see they've missed everything. They want to go to Bangkok and have sex all day long, and they want to do this, they want to join this club, they want to eat all these foods, they want to start drinking, taking drugs when they're older. But that's stuff you do when you're young. I've lived my life that way. I never restrained myself from going into any form of pleasure that I wanted to explore when I was young, and had the energy and the resilience to recover from it. Meanwhile, old friends of mine were all in suits and ties, commuting to work and having stressful lives and going through the fourth marriage. It's just the wrong way to organize your life, in my view.
Could you tell us or give some advice on the perfect environment for achieving longevity? So that could be environment, exercise, diet. And of course, people aren't going to magically switch their lives and be able to do all of this, but it could give them a little bit of an impetus or a direction.
You say environment. So if you're talking about a physical environment, it's away from cities, it's up in the mountains or down by the beach and all that. But that's not really doable these days. There aren't many places you can get away from all the negative effects of environmental pollution and all that. So I would say to create the proper internal environment in you. So yes, nutritional is one. You've really got to be careful about what you put inside your body. Eat well, drink good water, that sort of thing. You've got to do something with your breathing. The breath is the key to the energy system. It was quite interesting that the breath is the only autonomic function of the body. Autonomic meaning your metabolism, your heartbeat, your digestion. The breath goes on by itself, but you can also take command of it, volitional command. And through proper breathing methods, you can regulate your internal energy system. You can regulate the flow, and you can direct it to different parts of your body. You can feed vital energy to your brain and all your organs. So you've got to learn something about breathing. It's just such a huge, important tool, because that's really, even more than food, that's a way of regulating your internal environment. And I don't just mean internally within your physical body, but within your field, your energy field. And if you have a strong energy field, which can be developed through breathing, you can deflect a lot of the things that I was talking about before in the environment, the energy environment, the electromagnetic. So that's a great plus. And then, of course, the mental and emotional environment within you, because probably the single most damaging thing to your health of all factors is chronic stress. Chronic stress will kill you faster than heroin, and as fast as most pollution. It does, for one thing, stress shuts down your immune system. I mean, it's just like a light, like a switch. You're under a state of stress, and your immune system shuts down. You go on to the sympathetic branch of your nervous system, known as the fight or flight. You are constantly in a state of fight or flight, and burning up all your resources. And when that goes on for years and years, and which it does for many people, besides causing symptoms like depression and anger and all that, it's going to completely deplete your vitality, and to the point where finally you're going to get some fatal disease because your immune system has been shut down for so long. So that's something you can control very well with practice and awareness, consciousness, and the dissolution of unneeded, obsolete beliefs and illusions, which is really a big problem. You download so many wrong ideas from church, state, entertainment, films, TV, whatever, that you're full of delusions about life and about all kinds of things, and you're just always on the wrong path, always taking the wrong step. So you don't need to live that way. You can live in New York City, in Manhattan, in Los Angeles, anywhere else, if you know how to create a healthy internal environment and in your three levels of existence, which is your body, your energy, which is controlled through your breath, and your mind, your consciousness. So there you got it. That's the environment you need.
Well, thank you very much for that outline. And the last question on longevity before I just throw some bonus questions at you. Who is someone that you've met that really impressed you with their longevity?
In terms of living a long time?
Yeah, or maybe not even living a long time, but being of an advanced age and being youthful? Either or.
There aren't many around. I hope I can become one. I've met some people in India when I was traveling around there during that year between Berkeley and Monterey. Sadhus who lived in a loincloth and barefoot and depended upon alms, but they knew what they were doing. They smoked hash all day and tobacco. Maybe that was one of their keys. But I met some guys there who were very old. I don't think most of them even knew how old they were. But there were certainly those in their late 80s who were still wandering around in the traditional Indian tradition, which was when you turn 60, you become an ascetic wanderer and develop yourself. But they weren't ascetic in the way of starving themselves. They ate well, but it was interesting to watch them eat because they prepared all their own food with very good ingredients, sometimes just leftovers from the market, but they knew what they were doing. They were relaxed, they practiced meditation, breathing, and all that sort of thing. So I was impressed with them, quite impressed. I don't meet anyone in China anymore like that. But it's interesting, there are people like that. I haven't met them, but Red Pine went, I don't know, maybe it was 20 years ago, 15. He got a grant to travel in China to the mountains that Daoists favored, which were closed, by the way, to travelers. But he got there with a photographer who was about as crazy as he is. And they went up in the mountains, and they'd spend days up there, and they found Taoist hermits. Some of them were women, living in caves, living in shacks. Some of them didn't even know who was running the country anymore, and they were practicing all the old practices, and some of them were quite old. There's some pictures in his book. He wrote a book called Stairway to Heaven about that, and it's quite interesting. So I know there are people like that following the ancient Taoist traditions who are very advanced in age and have not come down from the mountains for a long time. The most impressive that I have heard of, unfortunately never met, was the Buddhist monk called Xu in China. That means empty cloud. He lived into his hundreds.
Okay.
And he went around China repairing old monasteries, bringing old traditional Buddhist orders back to life. He survived several beatings within an inch of his life from Red Guards, saved only by intervention from Zhou Enlai, things like that. And he was an amazing guy. I remember one story when he was sitting in his retreat uh, shack up in the mountains, he set a pot of rice to boil. And while it was cooking, he decided to sit for a while. And 3 days later, he woke up. And when he woke up, he came back and noticed, of course, a pot of dried, charred rice. And so he had just kind of drifted off into a 3-day meditation where he was absent from the world. He did stuff like that. And he inspired many, many people to the path practice. So there are people like that in the world. And you hear about them all over the place. There's some in Japan. It doesn't really matter what the condition of the outside world is. If you have the right internal environment, if you know how your body works, if you know something about breathing, and of course, mental and emotional work, you can create a field, your own field, which includes your body, but also, if you wanted to measure it, a space around you, often referred to as your aura, and a mental environment where you can live as long as you need to live to do what you want to do in the world.
Daniel, I'd like to round up with just some, well, they are, as I explain often on this podcast, they're meant to be quick-fire questions, but they rarely are quick-fire questions because normally people get thinking and talking about them. But I'd just like to give you, say, 3 or 4 questions to round up. Is that okay?
Sure.
Okay. On a scale of 1 to 10, how weird are you, Daniel?
9.5.
9.5. Still working on that other half.
Yeah, I'll try to get all the way. But if you took me in terms of any conventional viewpoint, definitely up there. I think from all viewpoints, because even people within my circle, so-called practitioners and all that, when they get to know me well, they also think I'm pretty weird.
Okay. What does your daily practice look like?
Snow is laughing in the background about the weirdness question. She calls me weird all the time.
Just for the listeners, Snow is your very lovely wife.
Yes, my wife and my partner.
Yeah, okay. What does your daily practice look like, Daniel?
Oh, that I can tell you. Qigong and Qigong are the way I start the day, by which I mean I start the day by working with my body and my breath to get things moving, to get things into balance, to shake off the sleep and the sort of torpor from the night. I spend half an hour to an hour doing that. And then I get to my tea table and I prepare my tea in a very methodical, traditional way. We drink high mountain oolong tea from Taiwan, the best there is. And oolong tea, particularly because it has certain properties which make it the best tea to drink, certainly for a Taoist. So I spend at least an hour doing that, and until I get myself completely saturated with the tea to the point where I feel okay about it. And then I don't eat right away. I'll do some work, because once you get chalked up with qi and tea, you're in a very good state of balance and clarity. Eating a lot of food diverts energy to your stomach, so I'll go and do some work, write for a few hours, and then I'll eat something that's very, very vitalizing, like coconut water, coconut meat, soaked nuts and seeds that have been activated by soaking overnight, that sort of thing. I usually don't eat cooked food, animal foods, until after 12.
I see. Tell me something that's true for you that almost nobody agrees with you on.
Well, let me see. That's a difficult question. Well, maybe it's not so difficult. I would say that a lot of things that I do and that other people think are bad for you, I don't think are harmful at all. That it's a matter of knowing how to do those things, how to use those things. Now that could involve substances, what people call drugs. In my view, in my personal view, I reserve the word drugs for chemicals, synthesized things. And the things that other people refer to as drugs, I call plant medicines. So I think those are not dangerous, that they can be dangerous, but driving a car can be dangerous if you don't know how to drive. So in that sense, I think it's probably the place where something's true for me that most people think is not for them. And it's also one of the reasons a lot of people think I'm weird.
Okay. You can sit down and drink tea with 3 people, living or dead. Who do you choose?
Living or dead?
Living or dead. You can bring them back to life for this round of tea, which could be a good hour or 2. Doesn't matter, living or dead.
Well, I would definitely have tea with Lao Tzu, because having read the Tao Te Ching, I think that's one of the finest pieces of writing that's ever been done. And it's also done in verse, which I like. I would say, probably most of the people I would pick would be from the Asian tradition. I would certainly I would say the woman poet, the lyric poet Li Qingzhao from the Song Dynasty. I would definitely invite her for tea.
So you've got Lao Tzu, you've got
Li Qingzhao,
and you've got room for one more at the tea table.
And one more for the tea table. I would invite my friend Red Pine. Of course, I have had tea with him, but we really haven't had a chance to spend a lot of time together to the point where we could spend a whole morning drinking tea. The translator I talked to you about.
Mm-hmm.
So, I would include him in particular because of the other 2.
Right. So you got a good balance around the table there.
Yeah, that's good. I kind of talk to those people anyway sometimes when I'm drinking tea alone at 5 in the morning.
What remains for me is to say, how should people get in contact with you? Or how should they learn more about the work that you do? Where should they go?
My website.
Your website.
Yeah, I don't give my personal phone number and email out to a lot of people, but...
No, and we certainly wouldn't expect you to do it over on this show.
There's a contact page on my website, and I don't field that mail. I have an assistant, an English guy actually, in Yunnan, who's lived there a long time. He's a teacher there, and he just likes our work. He came to do our program in Bali in 2003, the detox fasting program. He liked our work. He started following it, and finally he just asked us if there was some way he could help, which I thought that was the right attitude. He wasn't looking for a job. He had a job as a teacher. And with computers and all that, you don't have to be in the same place. So, first of all, Snow got him to help out organizing her programs, making bookings, making sure money was paid. We're not very good at that kind of stuff. And then I said, well, I've always wanted to have a website, but I don't want to be constantly fielding my mail. Would you be willing to be the mailman? And he said, sure. So that's when I got someone to establish my website, design it. And so he fields the mail, and he sort of sifts through it and forwards serious queries or interesting ones to me. And then I I'll respond. Usually, I don't charge people money for that. It is possible through my website to have consultations with me by phone, for which I do charge, and he organizes that. But simple queries I usually answer quite quickly.
So, and that is danielreid.com?
Dan Reid.
Dan Reid, D-A-N.
danreid.org. As an orgasm and orgy.
So that is where people are going to go. And you have authored numerous books. I think I counted something like 25 books you've done, or...
Yeah, I think it's somewhere in the upper 30s. A few of them aren't around anymore, and some of them aren't very memorable. But yeah, 30 odd some books, of which about a dozen were books I'd recommend to read.
Okay. So they can go and find you on Amazon as well, and they can find your books.
All my books are in print, and there's a page on my website that lists all the important titles and gives direct links either to Amazon or to the publisher.
I wish you'd get some of them done in audiobook. I think they'd be quite popular.
Some of them are, well, I don't know, audiobook. Oh, I don't know. Some of them are in electronic edition, but
okay.
I don't know. I don't think, no. An audiobook would require a reader.
Yes, you would need someone to read it, but
well, maybe I'll get you to do
it. They're very popular now. Audible. It's an Amazon company.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah. Okay. I know I do have electronic books. I don't read electronic books myself, but they're doing all right. I'm starting to catch up with the print editions.
Very cool. Right. I'm going to take this opportunity to thank you very, very much, Dan, for your time. I really, really appreciate it, and I'm sure the listeners really appreciated this episode as well. So thanks a lot.
You're very welcome. I enjoy this sort of forum, and I'd be happy to do one again.
Perfect. Hey, this is Robin Gamble, thanking you for listening, hoping you enjoyed the content, and kindly asking you to share with your friends if you did. Thanks again, and see you next time.